President Cyril Ramaphosa has asked the Gauteng High Court to halt any further steps by former President Jacob Zuma to privately prosecute him. Ramaphosa argues that the summons issued by Zuma for him to appear before the court on the 19th of January is unlawful, unconstitutional and should be set aside. Zuma has sought to charge the president with being an accessory to a crime after the fact. He claims Ramaphosa failed to take action against Advocate Billy Downer, the state prosecutor, when he allegedly leaked confidential medical records of Zuma's to News 24 legal journalist Karen Morn. Ramaphosa, however, argues that Zuma's private prosecution against him is an abuse of the court's processes and should be stopped altogether. At the same time, the ANC Electoral Committee has now responded to a complaint lodged against President Cyril Ramaphosa and National Chair Gwede Mantashe. This over results of the recently held and not quite finished 55th National Elective Conference. The committee has promised to thoroughly investigate the claims of vote buying, including having all the candidates release their financial records for campaign funding and expenditure. Thabang Mdletshe claims that Ramaphosa and Mantashe, including the president's advisor Bijani Chauke, who contested for the position of Treasurer General, were involved in the claimed vote-buying scandal. For more on our breaking news story about that urgent interdict President Cyril Ramaphosa is seeking against his predecessor, former President Jacob Zuma, I'm now joined by Newzroom Afrika's political editor, Lukhanyo Calata. Lukhanyo, such
Hello,
a pleasure
Aaron.
to have you in studio.
Yes, ma'am. Good to
Tell
be here.
me, big things happening in the world of politics and law this afternoon. What do you make of the president's latest step?
Today's a public holiday, right?
It is indeed, but it doesn't feel like it.
No, it does not feel like it. Not at all. Aaron, yes, as you've correctly pointed out, that President Cyril Ramaphosa has now responded to, the private prosecution that has been made, being sought against him by former President Jacob Zuma. So we understand that the president has now filed papers in the Gauteng High Court in which he seeks two things, Part A and Part B in his notice of motion. The first being that Part A is an application for the matter to be heard on an urgent basis on the 10th of January. Remember, the summons from former President Jacob Zuma says that the president must appear in the Gauteng High Court on the 19th of January. So the president wants his matter to be heard on the 10th of January, and which is Part 2 for the president, former President Jacob Zuma, to be interdicted from taking any further steps, right?
And it's all down to that nulli prosecute.
Yes, and it's all down to that. Remember, former President Jacob Zuma wants to charge and he wants to move, and he set the date of the 19th, right? So now President Cyril Ramaphosa says, hold on, please let the court. Can you hear this on an urgent basis on the 10th of January, and so that we can interdict former President Jacob Zuma from acting, against me in any way whatsoever. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa believes that he will be irreparably harmed by this private prosecution, should former President Jacob Zuma be allowed to continue with that matter.
And there are these two sort of pieces of this whole issue. There's the nulli prosecute certificate, a Latin term many of us might not even have known before this all erupted. And then there's the issue of the summons, which the president and indeed through that state attorney's letter claimed was defective.
Yeah.
So now we're seeing an attempt to kind of put a wedge between what the former president is trying to do and what the current president is hoping to achieve. What are the bigger political sort of ramifications of this, bearing in mind that the ANC hasn't even finished its elective conference?
Look, there's lots that we can obviously discuss and that we will get into in time, Aaron. But I think in this instance, former President Jacob Zuma had obviously wanted to, in some way, prevent ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa from contesting for a second term as party president, knowing that if President Ramaphosa succeeds and he continues as the President of the Republic, his continued backing, I suppose, of the NPA will mean that these charges that are looming or hanging over former President Jacob Zuma are likely to continue. Not that the president will likely interfere in all of that, but he will, provide the space for the NPA to be able to act without fear or favor, which is something that he had already started in his first term. So that's really one political issue. And we know, obviously, that there's the state capture matter, which President Cyril Ramaphosa is also likely to drive as president of the country, but also as president of the African National Congress. So, and we know former President Jacob Zuma is someone that is heavily implicated in that state capture matter. So, former President Jacob Zuma, we also know that the corruption case that's currently ongoing in Pietermaritzburg High Court, that can't continue up until all of these other matters are dealt with. And I'm sure it's all really part of a delaying tactic, as we've seen for almost the last 2 decades from former President Jacob Zuma, to ensure that his matter doesn't really continue in the Pietermaritzburg High Court.
Yes, and I believe a date set for the end of January for that arms deal trial, which is meant to continue. As you pointed out, there are all of these now sort of interlocutory matters, these sort of intersecting matters, sort of branching out from that case. The word Lukhanyo Stalingrad is ringing in my ear. I don't know if you can hear it in yours.
Look, I'm not sure. Aaron. Look, we've seen this from former President Jacob Zuma, like I said, for the last almost 2 decades now, where he has tried in various different ways to not get to have his day in court, even though he says he wants to have his day in court. But what we are seeing and what we are reporting on are all of these various different matters that have really got nothing to do with the actual case against him. But obviously what we're seeing is that the former President Jacob Zuma is just literally doing everything that he can, to try and prevent that case from actually sitting, and for this matter around the arms deal and his involvement in it to actually be ventilated. Now, could that be because the former President Jacob Zuma has got something to hide? We don't know. But what he said to us in the past, that he wants to have his day in court, and what he's showing are two very contradictory matters.
We had a legal analyst on a little bit earlier, Mpumelelo Zikalala, who was talking about the president potentially writing to the NPA on the issue of the unlawful prosecute. We know, of course, there was one which named Billy Downer outright, and then there was the more recent one which was far more generic, and suggesting that perhaps dealing with the issue of the unlawful prosecute by writing to the NPA while still being mindful of the need to separate and stay in your domain as president could be an option. The president hasn't done that. He's saying in this that he wants the unlawful prosecute to be thrown out, that he thinks the summons is defective, and that this is really just a hopeless case for the president. What do you make of that idea of the president writing to the NPA as opposed to going this route, bearing in mind it incurs costs with lawyers and the courts and time and the rest of it?
Look, it's unconstitutional immediately, because it then becomes a matter of political interference for the president, sitting president of a country, to write to any of the Chapter 9 institutions, particularly, not Chapter 9 institutions, but particularly to a department or, something like the National Prosecuting Authority. For him to have any direct communication, I suppose, with the NPA, immediately that's political interference. So what the president should do is to deal with his Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice then has some kind of conversation with the head of the NPA, Shamila Batoy, and then allow her to be able to deal with this matter, which is something that Vincent Magwenya, the president's spokesperson, has said to us. In fact, this is what happened. When former President Jacob Zuma first brought the matter up with the president referred the matter to to the Justice Minister.
Yes.
The Justice Minister then referred the matter to the NPA. The NPA was then the ones that communicated directly with former President Jacob Zuma on the issue of a unlawful prosecute involving Billy Downer and of course, our colleague in the media industry, Karen Moore.
Although her very case is on the issue that she herself is not named, and so the same issues that are coming up now with President Cyril Ramaphosa, Karen Moore's lawyers have raised in court in that she isn't in black and white on the original unlawful prosecute, which was issued by the DPP in KwaZulu-Natal. But you're pointing to the grievance Zuma has raised against the president around him going to the president asking for some action on his grievances about Billy Downer, and then the president referring it to the justice minister and it moving down the tree. Was that even the right move? Is that not a kind of tacit political sort of maneuver? Instead of the president saying, if you believe a crime has been committed here, you should go to the police. There's nothing more I can do within my powers.
Yeah. Look, two things, Aaron. Former President Jacob Zuma is renowned to be, firstly, a street fighter. And secondly, that he is a very, very good chess player. So for him, this could have been as part of, as part of his game, as part of his strategy, that he would write to the president in that letter anyway. President Cyril Ramaphosa maybe naively thinking, this is, maybe then just referring the matter down to the minister and then the minister to the NPA for him to then deal with. That move could have, could have been his undoing, because now obviously President Jacob Zuma is then able to say, but hold on, you are an accessory after the fact, even though the president maybe was just doing the right thing to say, from one president to a former president, to say, yes, I received this, I will then refer it to the necessary, structures and all of that. But obviously he couldn't deal with it, and I think President Cyril Ramaphosa understood that he can't necessarily get involved. Maybe, Aaron, he should have just said, I'm sorry.
Bye.
This is not something that I want to deal with, but also considering that this was a former president coming to him, maybe that played a role in him then accepting it, saying, okay, well, we will deal with it as the executive. I will refer it to the minister responsible. The minister then refers it to the NPA.
Yeah. I suppose the other issue there is that it's also his political senior, his mentor in some ways. These two men worked in cabinet, for years.
He was his president.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So if we just zoom out a little bit, we were at the ANC elective conference at Nasrec. This sort of litigation or prospective litigation dominated those first few hours into days of coverage.
Yeah.
Now that things have largely settled, there's talk about a cabinet reshuffle, moving people around, all the moving parts of the circus. How much political currency does this litigation have at this stage? We know that we have to hear whether or not the former president will oppose the urgent interdict. That deadline is tomorrow, date, as you say, on the 10th.
Look, former President Jacob Zuma, in essence, how do I say this nicely? Politically, he does not hold as much weight as he once had. Right? So
do you think the results of the conference bear that out?
Yes.
Okay.
Completely. If you look at, obviously, the province that he comes from, KwaZulu-Natal, coming into conference with 877 or 876 delegates, voting delegates, but ultimately then walking away with absolutely nothing. None of the candidates that they supported for the positions that they had touted. We're not sure. There wasn't much policy discussed at this national conference, so we're not sure whether or not the KZN's views, for instance, on the issue of step aside would have been ventilated and what the steps would have been in that regard. So KZN's powers or their might coming into this conference was really heavily dented. And that's a sign, because also, they were very supportive of former President Jacob Zuma, even where they disrupted the opening address by current ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. So there was a lot. There was a lot of Zuma in this conference. The problem was that power has moved, right? And politicians, being politicians, they are always going to relocate themselves to where the power is. And
the power and the paychecks.
Aaron.
One must say.
Yes. Well, because power is a means to, to be able to dispense that patronage. And obviously, politicians, particularly with some that we have in our country that are just career politicians, would want to move with the power base and the shifting sands. So in this case, former President Jacob Zuma no longer has the ability to dispense that patronage. So he's, delegates, members of the African National Congress aren't really interested in him anymore because there's nothing that he can do for them that helps advance their careers or even their bank balances. So they've moved along, and Cyril Ramaphosa clearly is where the power is now, and that's where most of them have thrown their weight up until the next person comes along to dethrone Ramaphosa.
You've described the former president as a street fighter. He's perhaps lost in the ring of the ANC elective conference, but certainly not down and out yet in the courts. We, of course, at Newzroom Afrika Channel 405 will keep you posted on that. Lukhanyo Calata, thank you so much for your time.